Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I've titled this podcast, Sex the Ex of a Friend. And this kind of crosses a lot of different things. Having a relationship with the ex of a friend can be a bit thorny. And, you know, these things are done. Yeah, and I'm talking the sex part. You know, that's done in the privacy of your own space. But figure that when two people get together, that is a part of the relationship, just like handshakes and everything else, when you get to that part of the relationship. But the idea about it being the ex of a friend, this is the part that can become fairly thorny. Now, the friend, there's a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. First, is this person that you have an interest in, is there a possibility that they can get back with your friend? Because if that is an open question, then you don't want to put a whole lot on this situation. Because what I'm emphasizing here is you have a friendship with the person, with your friend, and the ex may be somebody that you're interested in being in a relationship with. But if the friendship is going to maybe be damaged, think about this from that standpoint. Now, if that isn't a concern for you and your romantic pursuit is more, let's say has more of a draw to you than having the relationship with this friend, because friendships being what they are, it could be a childhood friend who it's been lifelong, or it could be, you call it friend, but maybe it's more of an acquaintance. So the strength of that relationship definitely comes into play. And you have to ask yourself these questions, and it's before these things get real heated, and then you have this confliction going on inside of you about what to do. Do you pursue your romantic interests? Do you keep the relationship with a friend? You know, how does that go? Now, all this is, well, put aside the fact that maybe this person of interest to you has a stake in it as well. Now, certainly they could be asking themselves the same question. But before you even put them into that position, you want to know where you stand, because obviously this conversation is going to come up. And I mean, imagine this. If you've ever been with someone at one time, then that situation broke up, and then you saw them with someone else, sometimes, you know, these things bring up some little jealousies. You know, I think we've all had, you know, that sort of experience in our lives. And how do we react to that? Now, when you're young, you may get a little vocal about it. You may express your displeasure. You may say some mean things, and you know, it may be a big experience for you to have. Maybe you didn't know you had the jealousies. Remember that song by the Jackson 5, "I Want You Back"? You might have a flashback of something to that regard. You know, in the song, if you don't know it, but most people have heard it, but in the song "I Want You Back," basically in the beginning, the guy didn't want the girl, and then somebody else saw her. And then he wanted her back because it was as if when somebody else showed an interest, then all of a sudden the value went up. So asking you the question of, well, how did you feel when you saw somebody that you may have had a relationship with get interested in somebody else? And, that's not even taking into account how your situation may have broken up. Maybe you didn't want to be with that person, but again, like the song said, I want you back. Or maybe you wanted that relationship and they didn't want you. Now they want your friend. How is that going to impact you? Now, if you are, or if the friend is in a relationship, it probably makes your choice about what to do in this situation a lot easier, because you don't necessarily have to take that in as heavy a consideration, because they're already in a relationship. So that's where their focus is. But you still want to think about the connection that you have with your love interest or your potential love interest, and maybe some of the awkward situations that may come up, at least in the beginning. If you have a similar social circle, then there may be some awkward moments, and maybe depending upon how recent that other connection ended. All of these things kind of play into this, I think, in determining how deep, how fast you can get into this. And ultimately, like I say, sexing the ex of a friend, that's where you figure that this relationship is going to go to. And after a while, it's, sort of the inevitability of this, considering that even if it's for a short period of time. But before you get there, those are some of the things that I want you to consider. Now, another something that may be on the table in terms of consideration is talking to your friend about how they feel about it. Now, that in some situations, that might be a really generous thing to do, just to kind of feel it out. And if, like I said, what's your bigger interest here? Is it the love interest, or is it your friendship? Okay, so to draw this picture again, if you haven't followed yet, there is the friend. There's you, and then there's your friend. Your friend had a relationship that ended, and the person that they ended the relationship with is now a person of interest to you. So what we are now trying to do is figure out how you're going to navigate the new love interest for you and the old friendship that you've had. As I said, bringing this into a conversation can bring about some questions about, the loyalty. Who are you loyal to? Some people have that. They make that a question. Are you being loyal to yourself by pursuing the love interest? Are you being loyal to yourself by asking the friend how they feel about it? And then, as I proposed, then one of the considerations to know, if your friend is already in another relationship, then that sort of takes the heat off having to really get their, and I'm doing this air quotes, permission, because you really don't need their permission, but it's just sometimes a consideration that you may have, because if you travel in the same social circles, you don't want there to be gossip. You don't want to have the burden of dealing with that business on a new relationship, because learning about a person, that is you and the new love interest, is challenging enough as it is. And if this person, you may know something about their history through your friend, there are some interesting dynamics there. If the love interest was never in, I don't see why they would be in a conversation with you about the relationship with their friend, then, there's definitely going to be different sides and different opinions about what's gone on and what's happened. And it's one thing when you're listening to a friend complain about a relationship, But then when you get involved with that other person, they're going to have something to say. And that's a whole different dynamic. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm going to pause here for a commercial, and I'll be back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, and I'm talking about sex, the ex of a friend. Now, I've been building this conversation that you have to have with yourself and with your love interest so that if this is a potential, and it could possibly happen, you know, there are lots of people out there, and when you know lots of people, then the potential for you to actually know somebody who may have dated somebody that's a friend even becomes more of a possibility. And then some people would say, well, there's millions of other people out there. Why don't you go find somebody else? Well, you know, you love who you love. But as this builds towards the direction of intimacy, and, you know, that means a lot to people. And the thought of somebody being intimately involved with somebody that you know, and if they were an ex-relationship of yours, how is that going to land on you? So I've been talking about it from the position of if you're the person that is interested in dating somebody that is the ex of one of your friends. So I'm going to spin that a little bit. What if you are that friend, that person, and it's your ex that's dating somebody who you know? How does that land on you? So, and the reason I want to spin it this way is because that is a very interesting dynamic that happens. Sometimes it's not you chasing your love interest, but it is somebody chasing an ex-relationship of yours. Now, if you didn't have a great experience with that person, maybe you're saying, good riddance. I'm glad they found somebody else to be with. It's less of a headache. Thank goodness. I mean, I've certainly been there, meaning I've had an ex who found somebody else to date, and I was glad that they found a love interest. Wasn't anybody I knew, but I was glad that they found somebody else to be involved with. Now, when it becomes somebody you know, do you feel jealous? Because you know they're going to be doing the do. They're going to be having relations. Is that going to bother you? Is that going to be, that image of that, is that going to be in your head when you are in your own personal space? Now, if you have a relationship of your own that you are in, then I would hope that the image of your ex-relationship isn't going to be rolling around in there. But you know what happens is it depends on how that relationship ended. If you wanted it to end, like I say, you're probably happy they have found somebody else. But if you didn't want it to end, then you might feel really, really conflicted about it. I mean, are you going to be happy for your friend to have a new relationship? Can you be neutral like that? Or is this going to be something that's going to bother you? You got to think about that. You got to think about that. And maybe that scenario is something you would think about if you were the person who is pursuing the love interest. Are you following me here? Because I know this can get a little confusing. You have to use the mind's eye and move the pieces of the puzzle around and get them to fit. See, these things become very thorny because oftentimes we don't know how we are going to react in these situations because we don't think about them. You know, we don't lay around thinking about these things because we just don't. I think we are more often self-focused on our own happiness. And when those things don't happen, when you're not being happy, then you transition. You try to find something that makes you happy. But it also, I think a lot of us roll the tape back from time to time and try to figure out, okay, what didn't work? Why didn't it work? Because I want to figure that part out. And that's why you have those images in your head of certain people. And then when it collides with this, you haven't processed it through all the way, and then they're off and on to another relationship. It's almost like it jumps into your head and it keeps it from being able to process it all the way because you haven't made closure with that. See, that can be really, really conflicting because sometimes in those spaces, and especially if you're still single, even, it happens too when you're with somebody, but in those spaces, sometimes you're not complete with it, and you might romanticize about going back into that relationship to figure out something. I mean, that's one of the things that happens in relationships. We get involved with people because there are aspects about ourselves that we are working through. You know, relationship coaches talk about this all the time. You know, why are you attracted to a particular person? And you know, there's a really interesting dynamic there. And it's not just because you were just all totally sexually attracted to them. I mean, that's a big part. Chemistry is a big part. But think about this concept when it comes to being happy for someone else, because there is this aspect of where it may circumvent, in some way, it may circumvent your process of trying to make closure with it. So how do you make closure with it? How are you going to be happy for your friend or your ex? You know, there's that sort of triangle thing happening, and it's tough. And then add that complexity of them having sex on top of it, and possibly really enjoying it, and maybe throw this on the top. Maybe you had a terrible relationship, but your sexual part was just off the charts. See, that could really make it difficult for you. Because you know they're out there having wall banging sex and you're not. Of course, now if you have another relationship, then you need to be working on your wall banging sex with your new partner and giving that your energy. And so therefore you may not be able to make closure the way you wanted to. And that's a big thing that happens in relationships. And where does sex fall in that? Sometimes that helps you make closure a lot faster with the past. Because when you have new sex just tends to take over until you and new sex has issues. And then you have to work on that. And if it's you being the common denominator, that is the issue. Whoa, boy, it's like deja vu. You got problems on the horizon. You got to work on that. But you can do that. You can do that. You have to be more focused on your problems. See, here's one of those times when you have to really focus on your own self-interest. And the problem at hand is the relationship that you have with the person you were with. And you're going to have to let the ex thing go. You can do that. You can do that. But what if you're single and you're watching this situation unfold? And like I said, you're trying to make closure. How do you make closure? Your ex has moved on, and sometimes that bugs you when they move on before you do. You're holding on to something that you possibly can't hold on to. and they've moved on, doesn't that feel it leaves you feeling kind of bare, stripped, naked, that kind of thing? People are looking at you. You wonder, oh man, geez, this really looks bad for me. And whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. It feels strange. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to take a break right here. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, talking about sex, the ex of a friend. Now, I've mentioned a lot of different scenarios here. There's what happens when you're involved with a new person. Let's say it's your ex that is getting involved with somebody, how that lands on you, how that happens to land on you if you're single. And if you've processed that relationship or not, do you wish them well? What's going on? How's that working? And with all of that happening, like I said, if you're in a relationship, then that's probably your focus. If you're single, maybe you're still processing that. So there's some of this stuff lingering on, and it's your friend that is dating the ex. How is that going to impact you? Think about this. Okay, so as I said, we can spin the table on this. If you're the person that is interested in the ex of your friend, how is that going to affect your friendship? How is that going to affect your ex? And you know, one thing I haven't even brought into the conversation yet, what if there are kids involved in this? See, this isn't just a relationship question in the simplest sense. There may be an added dynamic there. Now, a lot of us can process this stuff. We can move on. You know, we have our lives. We have things that we're interested in that we need to put time into. But sometimes we get stuck in these situations. And in life, these things come up sometimes as a mini tornado, so to speak. And it could really just knock us sideways, because it could come from, from a place of jealousy on your part, that you don't want your ex to move on because you haven't been able to get there yet. But I think if you learn about how you feel, and not just in not just in a selfish sense. I mean, yeah, you have to be thinking about yourself, but if you really get in touch, let me say it that way. If you really can get in touch with how you feel, I think you can do a much, much better job of processing this. And these are the kinds of things that are really excellent about bringing to a counselor. Because resolving these kind of internal conflicts can really help you go a long way to healing yourself. It'll teach you a lot about how you problem solve. It might even share It might even help to share the dynamic with which you grew up in. Maybe the passive-aggressive thing that you may have experienced as a kid, or maybe something that you've not only experienced as a kid, but you've carried into your childhood. Because all of these things are going to come up. And what intensifies these things is, I think we all kind of feel that once a person that we have been intimate with becomes intimate with someone else, whether we've processed it or not, but when they become intimate with someone else, then, that sort of kind of like seals the deal. That's, mentally, we kind of say that, oh, wow, those two are together. And if you're the person who has the love interest, so to speak, let's say you're the person that's getting the relationship with, the new love, you could at least feel comforted, feel satisfied with the fact that you have something to put your time and effort and energy into. And you can be off and on your own way. Now, like I mentioned from time to time, if you travel in the same social circles, there will be things to consider. And that's something that you and the new love interest have to take into account. If there's kids, that's another something that you'll want to discuss. The impact on them, how to handle those things socially. And they can be done. I think there's, social etiquette that we can follow, being courteous and polite. I think that always helps some of these awkward moments. And if, you need to talk about it, I think you should at least offer to talk. Maybe the other person isn't ready for that. Maybe, there might be a little combative. Then you just say, hey, okay, just wanted to offer. If, there's a better time to talk about it, then you can do so. Some people are good with a face-to-face thing, and, maybe it's not a big deal. But you got to bring this up. But the reason I'm talking about this is because, folks, this is real life. This happens. This really happens. And I can tell you from having been in a workplace that when you work a lot and you don't have a huge social circle, this kind of situation can really pop up in front of you and you not even think about it until you hear. Maybe it was a big secret and somebody told you about it and I was like, wow, man, I didn't even know that was happening. And you might have a reaction to it. So the potential really is there. And how would you be around a situation like that? No matter which one of these persons, which one of these three individuals in this situation you might be, whether you've moved on, whether you're the ex-lover or whether you're the new lover. The old lover, ex-lover, new lover, you can say. And with that dynamic, if you learn to process things, then you're probably in a much better place. If you've experienced relationship breakups, you're probably in a much better place to deal with this. Experience it in a healthy way. I'm not talking about all the drama and stuff. That's a whole different program. I'll probably have to write down some notes to do a program on that, on the drama breakups. But the ex of a friend, it's kind of hard to, if you fantasized about a certain individual that you wanted to be involved with and now they're free, hey, what's to stop you? Well, guess what? Listen to the last 28 and a half minutes of this podcast, and there's a lot to consider. Now, one of those things you might consider is, it depends on how serious this new thing is going to be. If you're just going to hang out, test the chemistry, see what that's like, that may not be anything to even want to announce, to even want to discuss. But if it's going to go further than that, then I think you really owe it to yourself to consider these questions that I've talked about in this podcast, so that you don't have an embarrassing mix-up somewhere that would possibly interfere in, in who you're trying to connect with. And hopefully you don't have those ghosts of the old lover in your head. Boy, wouldn't that be a mess? All three of you in the same room. Okay. So it's going to require you to think about what you want, be in conversation with the new love about what you want, they want, the two of you want, and then how to achieve that. And you'll deal with the social aspect of the friend, ex-lover in a bit. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, and I've been talking about sex, the ex of a friend.